She threw herself in front of a runaway horse. Not because she was brave, not because she had a plan, but because a man was lying unconscious in the middle of the road, soaked to the bone, completely still. And the horse was seconds away from ending his life. The rain was violent that night, the kind that blinds you, the kind that makes even the bravest souls stay inside and bolt their doors shut. But Annette had been coming home from the market, her shawl soaked through, her boots sinking into the mud, when she saw him, a man, face down, in the dirt. Expensive coat. No carriage, no servant, no explanation. She did not think. She dropped her basket, spread her arms wide, and screamed at the top of her lungs until the horse reared back and changed direction. Then silence, just the rain, and her heartbeat. But when this stranger was breathing slowly at her feet, she knelt down and turned him over. And the moment she saw his face, something inside her shifted. Not because he was handsome, though he was terribly so, but because even unconscious, even broken and bleeding in the mud, he carried something heavy, something she could not name, like a man who had been running from something for a very long time. She pulled him out of the rain. She did not know his name. She did not know where he came from. She did not know that half of England was searching for him. She did not know that the sealed letter pressed against his chest carried a secret powerful enough to shake the royal throne itself. All she knew was that he was alive, and that she was the reason why. What she could not have known was how completely that one decision was about to destroy the quiet, invisible life she had built for herself. Now, before we go any further, tell me this. If you found a mysterious stranger unconscious in the rain, would you stop to help, or would you walk away? Drop your answer in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. If this story is already pulling at your heart, please hit the subscribe button. You do not want to miss what happens next. Annette Collier had never done anything remarkable in her life. She was the daughter of a country seamstress, raised in a small cottage at the edge of Whitmore Village, a place so quiet that the loudest thing most mornings was the baker arguing with his cart horse. She mended clothes for coins, grew herbs in a cracked pot by the window, and kept her head down the way poor girls learned to do when the world made it clear that drawing attention to yourself never ended well for people like her. She was 22 years old. She had never been to London. She had never owned anything with gold on it. She had never once been called beautiful by anyone whose opinion carried weight in the world. Though old Mrs. Petch from the wool shop sometimes said she had kind eyes, which Annette supposed counted for something. Her life was small, and she had made peace with that. Mostly. The night everything changed, she had been at the market longer than planned, because Mrs. Hargrove, the apothecary's wife, had needed 3 linen panels stitched before Sunday service, and had only remembered to ask on a Thursday evening. Annette had stayed. She always stayed. That was the other thing about her. She could never say no when someone truly needed help, even when it cost her something. By the time she stepped onto the road home, the sky had already turned the color of bruises, and the wind had picked up in that sharp, angry way that meant the rain was not coming gently. It was coming all at once. She pulled her shawl tighter and walked faster. The rain hit before she reached the old mill crossing. Not drops, sheets. A wall of water that came down so hard it hurt her skin and turned the dirt road into a river of mud beneath her feet. She could barely see 2 steps ahead. The lantern she carried swung wildly, and twice nearly went out completely. She almost turned back. She thought about it. But Mrs. Hargrove's cottage was closer than her own at this point, and she could not exactly knock on that door at this hour and ask to sleep in the pantry. So she pressed forward. She heard the horse before she saw it. A sound like thunder that was not thunder, coming from somewhere ahead and to the right, growing louder, very fast. Then the shape of it appeared through the curtain of rain. A massive, dark animal, moving without a rider. Reins flying loose, eyes wild, hooves striking the ground with enough force to shake the road. And in the middle of the road, directly in the horse's path, a man lay completely still. Annette did not scream. She did not freeze. Her body moved before her mind caught up. She dropped the basket, spread her arms, and ran directly at the horse, shouting with everything in her lungs. The animal reared, its front hooves cutting the air just above her head, and for one breathless second she thought it was going to come down on top of her. Then it twisted sideways and bolted off the road into the field, crashing through the hedgerow and disappearing into the dark. She stood there for one shaking second. Then she ran to him. He was on his back now. She had turned him when she first reached him, one hand gripping the front of his coat to check if he was breathing. He was. Barely, but he was. His face was sharp and pale, jaw set even in unconsciousness, not like someone who had never once let himself look soft in front of other people. There was a cut above his brow that was bleeding freely into the rain. His coat was extraordinarily fine. That was the thing that struck her, even in the panic. Everything about his clothing spoke of a world she had only ever seen from the outside. She did not stand there wondering about it. She grabbed him under the arms and pulled. He was heavy, impossibly heavy for someone who looked so still. She dragged him off the road and toward the narrow shelter of the old mill wall, which blocked at least part of the rain. Then she knelt beside him, used the dry underside of her shawl to press against the cut on his head, and tried to think. She could not leave him here. He would die of cold before morning, if she did. The nearest house was hers, but 20 minutes on foot in good weather. In this rain, longer. She had no horse, no cart, no one to send for help. She looked at him again. His breathing had steadied slightly. His fingers moved once, then stilled. She made a decision. It took her the better part of an hour to get him to her cottage. She could not carry him fully, but he came in and out of consciousness enough that she was able to keep him moving, with her arm around his back and his arm across her shoulders, half dragging, half walking, both of them soaked through by the time she finally pushed open her front door and got him through it. She sat him against the wall first. Then she got the fire going. Then she pulled the small cot from her back room, and somehow, through a combination of stubbornness and sheer desperation, got him onto it. She peeled his ruined coat off him carefully. That was when the letter fell out. It slipped from the inner pocket and landed on the floor, face up, sealed with dark wax pressed into the shape of a crest she did not recognize. It was addressed to no one. There was no name on the outside, just the crest and below it, 3 words written in a hand so controlled it looked almost like print. For the crown only. Annette stared at it for a long moment. Then she picked it up, set it on the table well away from the fire, and went back to taking care of the man bleeding on her cot. She cleaned the wound on his head with vinegar and water. She wrapped it with strips of clean linen. She got a thin blanket over him and positioned him on his side in case he was sick in the night. She fed the fire until the room was warm enough that she stopped shaking. Then she sat in her mother's old chair, which she had kept even though it was falling apart, because she could not bear to throw it away, and she watched him breathe. She told herself she was watching in case his condition changed. Which was true. She did not tell herself the other true thing, which was that she could not stop looking at his face. There was something about him that she couldn't identify and could not shake. Not beauty exactly, though that was certainly present. Something older than that. Something that looked like a burden. Like this man had been carrying something for so long that even sleep could not fully release him from it. His brow was slightly drawn even now. His jaw was still set. He looked like someone who had forgotten what it felt like to simply rest. She fell asleep in the chair before she meant to, but when she woke, it was still dark and he was awake. He was sitting up on the cot, completely still, watching her with grey eyes that were sharp and clear in a way that told her he had probably been awake for some time before she noticed. There was nothing confused about his gaze, nothing soft. He looked at her the way someone looks at a situation they are already trying to calculate their way out of. She sat up straight. "You should not be sitting up. Your head." "My head is fine," he said. His voice was low and even, controlled in the same way his face was controlled. "It is not fine. I stitched it myself, and I know what I used to close it, so please do not argue with me about your own wound." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a surprise. More like he had expected hostility or fear and received neither, and was now recalibrating. "Where am I?" he asked. "Whitmore, my cottage. You were on the road." She stood, because sitting felt wrong when he was looking at her like that. "There was a horse. You would have been killed." A pause. "You moved the horse." "I frightened it off, yes." He looked at her for a moment, with an expression she could not read. Then he said, "Are you alone here?" The question was quiet. Not threatening, but it landed strangely all the same. "Yes," she said, which was true, and then immediately wished she had said something less honest. "My brother visits regularly," she added, which was not true at all. She had no brother. The corner of his mouth moved very slightly. He had noticed. "I am not going to harm you," he said. "I did not say you were. You are thinking it." "I am thinking," she said carefully, "or that you have a sealed letter in your coat pocket addressed to the Crown. You were unconscious in the middle of a country road with no horse and no servant and no explanation, and you still haven't told me your name. So I am thinking about several things." He went very still. Not the stillness of someone relaxing. The stillness of someone who had just realized something important. His eyes moved to the table where she had placed the letter, and then back to her face. "You read it?" he asked. "I read what was written on the outside, which was all that was visible." She met his gaze directly. "I am not a thief." Something moved behind his eyes, something that looked, very briefly, like relief. "No," he said quietly. "I can see that." He did not offer his name. She did not ask again. Not that night. Or she made tea because it was something to do with her hands. She poured a cup and brought it to him, and he accepted it without comment, which struck her as the behavior of someone who had been served all his life and had simply never learned to acknowledge it. Then she sat back in her chair, and the silence between them settled into something strange. Not uncomfortable exactly. Charged. He drank the tea. She watched the fire. "The people who put me in that road," he said eventually, without looking at her. "We'll come looking." She kept her eyes on the fire. "Looking for you, or for the letter?" A long pause. "Both." She absorbed that. "How long do I have before they arrive?" He looked at her then, directly, like he had not expected that question, like he had expected panic, or demands, or tears. "A day," he said. "Perhaps 2. Then you need to be well enough to leave by morning." He stared at her. She stared back. "You saved my life," he said slowly. "And your response is to give me a deadline." "My response," she said, "is practical. I live alone. I cannot be found sheltering someone who is being hunted, whatever the reason. I am sorry for your situation, truly. But I also have a situation." He was quiet for a long moment. Then something in his face changed, not softened exactly, but opened slightly, like a door that had been shut for years had been pushed a fraction of an inch. "You are extraordinary," he said. It did not sound like a compliment. It sounded like an observation he had not intended to make out loud. Annette felt warmth rise in her chest that she firmly told to stop. "I am sensible," she said. "There is a difference." He said nothing more that night, but he did not sleep either. And neither, truly, did she. His name, she learned by accident. She was in the small lean-to beside the cottage the next morning, pulling a clean shirt from the trunk she kept there, the largest one she owned, which had belonged to her father, when she heard hoofbeats on the road outside. 2 horses, moving fast and then stopping. She went still. Voices, male, close. She crept back into the cottage through the rear door and pressed herself against the wall beside the window, angling to see without being seen. 2 men on horseback, both in dark riding coats, both scanning the road and the surrounding fields with the practiced efficiency of people who did this for a living. One of them held the reins of a 3rd horse. The man on her cot was already awake. He had heard them too. He was on his feet, which he should not have been. One hand braced against the wall for support, the other pressed to the side of his head. His face was white with the effort. "Get down," she whispered. He shook his head. "They will see your shadow through the window if you are standing. Get down." He looked at her. Then he lowered himself to the floor, slowly, and she could see it cost him. Outside, one of the men called out, "Duke Renwick! Lord Renwick, if you are in the area, your presence is urgently required." The silence in the cottage was total. Annette didn't move. She didn't breathe. She kept her eyes fixed on the window and her body flat against the wall. After a long moment, the hoofbeats moved on. She waited until she could no longer hear them. Then she turned. He was watching her from the floor. He had not tried to answer the men outside. He had not tried to signal them. He had simply stayed down, where she had told him to stay, and waited. That alone told her something important. "Duke Renwick," she said. He said nothing. "They called you Duke Renwick. You have sharp ears," he said. "You have a title," she said, "a significant one." He got himself back onto the cot with visible effort. She crossed the room and helped him without being asked, getting her shoulder under his arm and taking enough of his weight that he did not have to. He let her, which she suspected was its own kind of admission. "You could have called out to them," she said, once he was settled. "They were looking for you." "Yes." "But you did not." "No." She waited. "Those men," he said carefully, "are employed by someone who would very much like to get their hands on what I am carrying before it reaches its intended destination." His eyes moved to the letter on the table. "If I had called out to them, I would have handed them exactly what they came for." So they are not your men. They are wearing my livery, he said. That is not the same thing. Annette sat down on the edge of the chair and looked at him steadily. A duke. She was sitting in her mother's cracked armchair in a cottage with a leaking corner and a fire that smoked when the wind came from the east, looking at a duke who was bleeding through her linen bandage and had spent the night on her cot. The world, she thought, was occasionally very strange. "Your name is Renwick," she said. "What is your given name?" "Cassius," he said. Then, after a pause, as if the habit of introduction had been so long absent, it needed to be relearned. "Cassius Renwick, Duke of Aldenmere." "Annette Collier," she replied. "Seamstress." Something about that seemed to reach him. He looked at her for a moment in a way that was different from all the other ways he had looked at her since waking. Less calculating, more present. "Annette," he said. Just her name, like he was placing it somewhere carefully. "You are bleeding again," she said, because she needed to say something practical immediately. "Hold still." She replaced the bandage. He sat perfectly still while she worked, which she appreciated, because he was a large man, and she was working in close quarters, and the whole situation required a degree of composure she was actively constructing second by second. "Who put you on the road?" she asked while she worked. "Someone in my own household," he said. She paused, then kept moving. "You know who?" "I have strong suspicions. And the letter? The one for the crown. What is in it?" He looked at her. "If I told you that, I would be putting you in considerable danger." "I would argue," she said evenly, "that the danger is already here, since 2 men just rode past my front door calling your name." He was quiet for a moment. "You are not frightened?" "I am absolutely frightened," she said. "But fear does not help anyone, so I am setting it aside for now." He watched her finish the bandage. She tied it off and sat back. "The letter?" he said slowly. "Contains evidence. Documentation of something that has been happening within a very powerful family for a very long time. Something that, if it reaches the right hands, will change several things that currently appear settled and permanent." "The royal family?" she asked. He did not answer. But he did not look away either. That was answer enough. Annette stood and went to the window to check the road. Empty. The morning was grey and wet, still threatening rain, the hedgerows dripping steadily. She turned back. "There is a woman in this village," she said. "Mrs. Drummond. Her husband was a solicitor before he passed. She keeps connections with people in the city, people who can carry things quietly and quickly to where they need to go. She's discreet. She has never once repeated anything told to her in confidence in 30 years. Cassius stared at her. "You are suggesting I use a village widow as a courier for a document bound for the royal household?" "I am suggesting," Annette said, "that no one looking for a document addressed to the crown is going to think to watch a 60-year-old woman in a village hat posting a letter through her usual channels, whereas they are absolutely watching every road out of this county for a duke on horseback." Silence. Then quietly, "That is actually quite clever." "I am sensible," she said again. "I told you that." He almost smiled. Almost. The corner of his mouth moved in that same small way it had the night before, and she caught it before it disappeared. She caught herself noticing it too, and turned back to the window before her face could do anything she would regret. Outside, in the lane that ran behind the cottage, she heard something, and different from the hoofbeats earlier. Softer, a foot on gravel. She held her hand up, flat palm toward Cassius, and watched the rear window. A figure appeared. Young woman. Not someone she recognized, which in Whitmore was already alarming because she knew every face in this village. The woman looked at the cottage once, directly, then looked away and kept walking, too deliberately. The way someone looks at something they are pretending not to look at. Someone is watching the cottage, Annette said quietly. Cassius was already on his feet again. He moved to the opposite wall, away from both windows, and his whole bearing had shifted. He was not a wounded man anymore. He was something sharper, alert in a way that made the small room feel smaller. Dark hair, he said. Slight. Young. Yes. Oh, you know her? She is the daughter of my steward, he said. Her name is Petra. She is 19 years old, and she does whatever her father tells her without question. His jaw tightened. Her father is the man I suspect. Annette absorbed this. The steward's own daughter, sent to find him. Sent, perhaps, to confirm his location and report back. She cannot know you are here, Annette said. She does not yet. But she is looking. Then we need to move you. She turned from the window and began pulling on her outer coat. The Drummond house is on the far edge of the village. There is a way through the fields that avoids the main lane entirely. Can you walk? I can walk. Cassius. She said his name directly, deliberately, because this was not a moment for softness. Can you actually walk? Or are you saying yes because you are the sort of man who always says yes to that question, regardless of the honest answer? He looked at her. Something moved through his eyes that she could not name. Something that looked almost, impossibly, like the beginning of trust. I can walk, he said again. And this time she believed him. She wrapped the letter inside an oilcloth she used to protect fabrics from damp, and she tucked it beneath her coat against her ribs. If anyone stopped her, she was a seamstress on an errand. She had done it 100 times. They left through the back, through the small garden where her herbs grew in their cracked pots, through the gap in the hedge she had never bothered to repair, and into the field behind. The grass was wet and the ground was soft, and she set a pace that was quick but not conspicuous, or St. Cassius kept up without complaint. She did not look at him while they walked, but she was aware of him the way you are aware of weather, constantly, on your skin, at the edges of everything. After several minutes, he spoke. You did not ask why I was on the road last night, he said. You have not asked how I came to be there. I assumed you would tell me if it was useful for me to know. You are not curious. I am extremely curious, she said. But curiosity does not entitle me to information. A pause. The field sloped gently downward ahead of them, toward the far hedgerow and the narrow path that ran along the back of the village. I was ambushed, he said. 3 men. On the road from Halewick. They took my horse and left me in the rain. I think they expected me to die of exposure before morning. She said nothing, because there was nothing to say that was adequate. If you had not been there, he continued, and then stopped. The sentence finished itself in the space between them. If you had not been there, she kept walking. I was not there by design, she said finally. Mrs. Hargrove needed linen panels for Sunday. Then Mrs. Hargrove, Cassius said, may have saved rather more than she knows. Annette almost smiled at that. She controlled it. They reached the path and followed it along the back edge of the village, staying close to the hedge, moving quickly. Twice she heard voices from the lane on the other side, and both times she touched his arm lightly, and they stopped and waited, and the voices passed. When they finally reached the Drummond house, a wide stone cottage with a well-kept garden and window boxes full of late winter herbs, Annette knocked in the pattern she had known since childhood. 3 quick, 1 slow. The door opened almost immediately. Mrs. Drummond was 63 years old, had iron-grey hair pulled back in a tight knot, and had the eyes of someone who had seen everything twice and found most of it manageable. She took 1 look at Annette, 1 look at Cassius, and stepped back to let them in without a single word. Inside, in the warm kitchen that smelled of dried lavender and strong tea, she looked Cassius up and down with complete calm. Then she looked at Annette. "How bad?" she asked. "He needs a day of rest and a quiet route out of the village," Annette said. "And I need you to carry a letter through your usual channels without anyone knowing what it is." Mrs. Drummond looked at Cassius again, while he was standing in her kitchen in a ruined shirt with a bandaged head, and he still somehow looked like exactly what he was. Some people simply cannot hide the weight of who they are, no matter what they are wearing. "You are nobility," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Cassius said, "and you are in trouble." "Yes." She considered this for approximately 3 seconds. Then she went to put the kettle on. "Sit down, then, both of you. You look like you have been dragged through a field." "Several fields," Annette said. And despite everything, despite the hunted man beside her, and the letter beneath her coat and the steward's daughter, who was still out there somewhere watching, she felt the tension in her chest ease, just slightly, just enough. Cassius sat across from her at Mrs. Drummond's kitchen table. He looked at her. She looked at the kettle, but her heart, quietly and without her permission, was paying attention to him. Every second, without stopping. And that, she knew, with the particular clarity of someone who has always been very sensible, was going to be a problem. Mrs. Drummond set 3 cups on the table and poured without asking who wanted what. Then she sat down, folded her hands, and looked at Cassius the way a woman looks at a problem she has already begun solving. "The letter?" she said. "Who receives it?" Cassius glanced at Annette. Annette slid the oilcloth package from beneath her coat and placed it on the table. Mrs. Drummond did not touch it. She simply looked at the crest on the seal, and her expression shifted, just barely, like a door closing quietly behind her eyes. "I see," she said. "Can it be done?" Annette asked. "My late husband's nephew works in the postal sorting office in Grantham. He owes me 3 separate favors and has never once asked a question I didn't want answered." She looked up. "It can be done. But it needs to move today. Not tomorrow. Today," Cassius confirmed. Mrs. Drummond stood, took the letter without ceremony, and carried it to the back room. They heard a drawer open and close. Annette exhaled. Then the front gate creaked. All 3 of them went still. Annette moved to the side of the window and looked out through the gap in the curtain. 2 men were standing at the gate. Not the same 2 from the road earlier. Different men. Broader, harder looking. One of them had his hand resting on something at his hip that was not a riding crop. "Back door," Mrs. Drummond said from the doorway of the back room. She was already holding Cassius's coat, dried and folded. "Through the garden, left at the wall, then follow the church path north. There is a groundskeeper's shed at the edge of the Halton estate. Unlocked. Always has been." Cassius took the coat. "Habuho, you knew we might need to leave quickly." "I know how trouble walks," she said simply. "Go. I will answer the door and be a confused old woman for as long as you need." A knock at the front. Loud. Official. Annette was already moving. She caught Cassius by the sleeve without thinking and pulled him through the kitchen, out the back door, and into the garden. The cold air hit them immediately. She did not stop. Left at the wall, exactly as Mrs. Drummond had said, then the narrow church path that curved north through a line of bare oak trees, the wet grass soaking through her boots within seconds. Cassius kept pace beside her. He was breathing harder than he should have been, and she could see the tension in his jaw that meant the pain in his head was worse than he was admitting. She did not slow down. There was no room for it. Behind them, faintly, they heard the front door of the Drummond house open. They did not look back. The groundskeeper's shed sat at the far edge of the Halton estate field, half hidden by an overgrown hawthorn hedge. It was small and cold, and smelled of earth and old timber, but the door opened exactly as Mrs. Drummond had promised. Annette pulled it shut behind them, and they stood in the dimness, both breathing hard, listening. Nothing followed. After a long moment, Cassius sat down on an overturned crate. He pressed the back of his hand to his forehead, just briefly, and she saw his eyes close for 1 second before he pulled himself back. "Your bandage is bleeding through again," she said. "I know. You should not have walked that fast. You set the pace." She looked at him. He looked at her. And then, absurdly, she almost laughed. Or she caught it before it escaped, but he saw it anyway, and that almost smile appeared again at the corner of his mouth. "There is a question," she said, settling herself on the floor against the opposite wall because there was nowhere else, "that I haven't asked you." "Only one? The most important one?" She looked at him steadily. "The people trying to stop that letter from reaching the Crown. How far will they go?" The almost smile disappeared. He was quiet for long enough that the silence became its own kind of answer. "The man who arranged my ambush last night," he said, "has already arranged the disappearance of 2 other people who knew what was in that letter. One was a clerk. One was a solicitor." He paused. They were not simply removed from their positions. The shed felt colder suddenly. "Then this is not just about power," she said. "This is about survival. Theirs and yours." "Yes." "And mine," she said, "now that I am involved." He looked at her then, with something that was not the calculation from before, and not the almost smile, and not the controlled blankness he wore like armor. It was something plainer and more difficult than any of those things. Something that looked like guilt. "I should not have let you help me," he said. "Last night, at the cottage. I should have sent you away." "You were unconscious when I found you," she said. "You did not have a great deal of say in the matter. This morning, then, I should have told you to walk away. And if you had," he said nothing. "I would not have walked away," she said. "So the conversation would have been very short, and we would be here anyway." She pulled her coat tighter. "I am not telling you this to be comforting. I am telling you because I need you to stop feeling guilty about it and start thinking about how we get out of this county alive." Something shifted in his face, deep and slow, like stone moving. "You are not what I expected," he said quietly. "You had expectations about a seamstress you had never met." "I had expectations about people in general." He looked at his hands. 17 years as a duke teaches you that most people want something from you. Position, influence, money, favor. It becomes very easy to see every interaction as a transaction waiting to reveal itself. Annette said nothing. She let him speak. "You have not asked me for anything," he said. Not once. Or you pulled me out of the road, stitched my head, made me tea, moved me across 3 fields in the rain, and you haven't once asked what it might be worth to you. It would not occur to me to ask that, she said. I know, he said. That is what I mean. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked away, because the thing happening in her chest was getting louder, and she needed it to be quiet. Tell me about the secret, she said. The royal one. Not the details, but enough that I understand what we are actually carrying. A long pause. There is a child, he said finally, legitimate, hidden, whose existence would alter the order of succession in a way that certain people find deeply inconvenient. His voice was careful and precise. The documentation in that letter proves the child exists and establishes the line clearly. It has been suppressed for 11 years. Annette sat very still. 11 years, she said. The child's mother died without telling anyone except my father. My father told me on his deathbed 6 months ago. I have spent 6 months gathering the proof. His jaw tightened. Someone found out I had it. Your steward. He has loyalties I did not know about. Financial connections to a man who would lose everything if the child's existence became known. Outside, a bird moved through the hawthorn hedge and then was gone. The field beyond was silent. The child, Annette said carefully. Are they safe? Cassius looked at her. The question had surprised him again. She kept doing that. She could see it, landing in places he was not expecting. They're with a family in the north, he said. They do not know who they are. They think they are orphans. Something tightened in Annette's throat. An orphan who did not know who they were. A child growing up without a name that was rightfully theirs, while the people who should have protected them arranged ambushes in the rain. Then we have to make sure that letter gets through, she said. We, he repeated. Yes, she said. We. He looked at her for a long moment. Outside the shed, the wind moved through the hawthorn. Somewhere distant, a church bell rang the hour. Why? He asked. It was a genuine question, quiet and stripped of everything else. Just that. Why? Because a child deserves to know who they are, she said. That is not complicated. Cassius said nothing, but something in his face broke open, very quietly, the way ice breaks in early spring. Not all at once, but in a slow, irreversible shift. And Annette saw it, and looked away before he could see that she had. They stayed in the shed until midday. Annette used strips torn from the hem of her underskirt to replace the soaked bandage on his head, because it was either that or watch him bleed quietly, and she found she could not do the second thing. He sat still while she worked with his head bent slightly toward her, and the closeness was the kind that required active effort to ignore. She focused on the knot. Your steward, she said, to have something to say. What is his name? Gareth Lowe, Cassius said. He has worked for my family for 22 years. I trusted him with everything. That must feel like a particular kind of wound. Yes. One word. Flat and careful, but she heard what was underneath it. Were there signs? She asked, looking back. He was quiet for a moment. There were moments I explained away. Times when information I had not shared somehow reached people it should not have. Times when he was in rooms I had not placed him in. A pause. I made excuses. He was loyal for 20 years. It is very difficult to believe that loyalty was always conditional. Maybe it was not always conditional, she said. Maybe something changed. People do not usually begin as betrayers. He looked at her, which he should not have done while she was still tying the bandage, and she had to stop and wait until he looked away again. "You are very generous," he said. "I am honest," she replied. "There is a difference. It does not make what he did excusable. It just means there may have been a person in there once before. Whatever got hold of him did." She finished the knot and stepped back. Cassius reached up and touched the bandage once, briefly. "Oh, thank you," he said. And it was not the reflexive thanks of a man being tended to. It was something else, heavier, meant for more than just the bandage. She nodded and sat back against the wall. Shortly before noon, they heard hoofbeats again, but these passed far to the west, along the main road, and faded quickly. Whoever was searching had not found the church path. Not yet. "We cannot stay here past dark," Cassius said. "I know. Where do you need to go?" "Hallowik. There is a man there, Lord Drummore, who can arrange safe passage to London. He is one of 3 people I trust absolutely. Halewick is 9 miles. Yes, on foot, with a head wound. You are not obligated to come," he said. It was not said dismissively. He meant it genuinely. She could hear the effort in it. "I know I am not obligated," she said. "How do you plan to navigate 9 miles of countryside when you cannot turn your head quickly without losing your balance? I watched you in the field." A pause. He did not deny it. "You noticed that. I notice most things." She stood. "I know a route, through Pelham Wood, then skirting the edge of the Cranmore Farms, then joining the east road to Hallowik from the south. It avoids every main crossing. I have walked it before." "Why have you walked to Hallowik before?" "There is a fabric merchant there who stocks French cotton at half the London price." She looked at him steadily. "Do you want to debate my reasons for knowing the route? Or do you want to use it?" The almost smile. Stronger this time. Still barely there, but definitely stronger. They left the shed when the church bell rang at noon. They're moving north along the hedge line before cutting west into the tree line of Pelham Wood. Under the canopy, it was quieter, the ground softer, the wind blocked by the trunks. Their footsteps were nearly silent. Cassius walked steadily. She watched him from the corner of her eye and said nothing. He was managing. Barely, but genuinely. After a while he spoke. "Tell me about yourself." The request surprised her. "There is not much to tell. You have been asking me questions for the better part of 24 hours. Allow me one." She considered this fair. "My mother was a seamstress. My father worked the Holton estate until he died when I was 14. I have been working since I was 12. I live alone, and I prefer it that way." A pause. "That is most of it. Do you have anyone?" he asked. "Family. Friends. Mrs. Drummond," she said, "and a woman in the next village named Hetty Olcott, who makes the best bread in the county and occasionally leaves a loaf on my step when she thinks I have been working too much." She paused. "And a cat named Percy, who is not mine, but has decided otherwise." Something in his face shifted quietly. "That sounds like a life that is very deliberately small," he said. She felt the accuracy of it land somewhere tender. "It is a life that is mine," she said. "That is more than some people have. I did not mean it as a criticism. I know you did not." She stepped over a root. "What about yours? Your life? Before all this?" "Before all this," he repeated slowly. "I had a house in London I rarely used, an estate in Aldenmere I visited twice yearly, and a social calendar managed entirely by my secretary, because I find most social occasions unbearable." He paused. "I had obligations, duties. An endless line of things requiring my signature and my presence. I had very few things I actually chose. That sounds like a life that is very deliberately hollow, she said. A silence. Yes, he said quietly. It was. They walked without speaking for a while after that. The wood thinned gradually, and the Cranmore farm fields appeared beyond the trees, wide and brown in the winter light, a thin line of smoke rising from the farmhouse chimney far to the north. They skirted the edge carefully, staying within the tree line. Then Annette stopped. There was a figure on the path ahead, standing still, waiting. Not one of the broad men from before. Not Petra, the steward's daughter. But this was a woman in her 30s, well dressed by country standards, standing directly in the center of the path, with her hands folded in front of her, and an expression of absolute calm on her face. Cassius went very still beside her. "You know her," Annette said. It was not a question. "That," he said, in a voice stripped of everything, except something that sounded, beneath all the control, like grief, "is my cousin, Lady Fay Renwick. Is she safe?" The pause before his answer was too long. "I thought so," he said. "Until this morning." "What happened this morning?" "Petra," he said. "The steward's daughter. The reason she was watching your cottage was not simply to find me." His jaw tightened. "She was carrying a message. I saw the paper in her hand before she turned away. It had Fay's seal on it." Annette looked at the woman on the path. Fay had seen them now. She had not moved. She was simply watching, with that unreadable expression, and waiting. "She could have sent those men to the Drummond house," Annette said. "Yes." "But she is here alone." "Yes." "Either she is genuinely trying to reach you," Annette said slowly, "or she is exactly where someone wants her to be, making you think that." Cassius said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Both things were equally possible, and the difference between them was the difference between safety and catastrophe. Fay took one step forward. Then she called out, her voice low and controlled. "Cassius, I am alone. I give you my word." His jaw moved. Annette could see what it cost him, the decision forming, of the weight of trust that had already been broken once in the last 24 hours, pressing against the possibility that it was about to be broken again. "Cassius," Annette said quietly. Not to push him, just to remind him she was there. He looked at her, just for a second. Then he stepped out of the tree line. Annette stayed exactly where she was, because she was sensible, and because if this went wrong, someone needed to be able to run. Fay Renwick walked toward him quickly, and when she reached him, she gripped his arms with both hands and looked at him with eyes that were red at the edges, which was the first crack in the composure she had been wearing. "You look terrible," she said. "I have had a difficult evening," he said. "Gareth Lowe has been arrested," she said. "An hour ago. And someone sent a report directly to the magistrate in Halewick naming him. He was taken before he could leave the county." Cassius stared at her. "Who sent the report?" Fay looked past him, directly at Annette, standing at the edge of the trees. "Mrs. Drummond," she said. "She sent 2 letters this morning, apparently. One north, one to the magistrate." Annette closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Of course she had. When she opened them, Cassius had turned to look at her. He was standing in the pale winter light with his ruined bandage, and his grief-heavy face, and his grey eyes, and the way he was looking at her was something she had no word for, and did not want to name. She walked out of the trees. "We still need to get to Halewick," she said, "because someone had to say something practical. Is your word of being alone still good?" This she directed at Faye. Faye looked at her with something between surprise and assessment. "Yes," she said. "I have a carriage waiting on the East Road, a quarter-mile." "Then let us not stand in the open any longer," Annette said, and she walked past both of them, toward the East Road, because standing still when she felt this unsteady was not something she was willing to do. Not where anyone could see. Behind her, she heard Cassius follow, and the sound of his footsteps, close and steady at her back, was the most dangerous thing she had encountered all day. Faye Renwick's carriage was a plain, hired one, which told Annette that Cassius's cousin had been careful enough to leave her family crest at home. Smart woman. Annette revised her opinion of her upward during the short walk to the East Road, even though they had not yet exchanged more than 4 words directly. Inside the carriage, the 3 of them sat in a silence that was dense with everything unsaid. Faye had her hands folded in her lap and was watching Cassius with an expression that mixed relief and grief in equal measure. Cassius sat across from Annette and looked out the window and said nothing. The countryside moved past in shades of grey and pale brown. It was Faye who spoke first. "The man behind Gareth Lowe," she said, "is Lord Bastian Crow. He is not simply a nobleman with financial interests. He is the illegitimate half-brother of the child in the letter. If the child's existence becomes official, his entire claim to the Crow estate, which was granted to him on the assumption he was the last living heir, collapses completely." Cassius turned from the window. "How do you know about Crow?" "Because he came to my house 3 days ago," Faye said flatly. "He sat in my drawing room and drank my tea and told me, very pleasantly, that it would be in everyone's best interest if you were never found." Her jaw was set. He assumed I would agree with him. He was mistaken. Annette looked at her. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I would think about it," Faye said. "And then I sent every message I could to try to find Cassius before Crow's men did." She looked at her cousin. "I was 1 day too late." "You were not too late," Cassius said quietly. "Annette found me." Faye looked at Annette then. Properly looked, the way she had not quite done until this moment. It was a long, assessing look. Not unkind, but thorough. "You pulled him out of the road," she said. "Yes." "And stitched his head, and moved him through 3 fields, and arranged a courier, and evaded 2 sets of men who were actively searching for him." "Mrs. Drummond helped considerably," Annette said. Something shifted in Faye's expression. Not quite a smile. Something warmer than that, and more complicated. "Yes," she said. "I imagine she did." She looked at Cassius again. "You have been very lucky." "I know," he said. And he was not looking at Faye when he said it. Annette looked out her own window and concentrated on the road. But they reached Halwick as the afternoon light was thinning toward evening. The carriage turned off the main road and down a long lane lined with bare elm trees, and at the end of it sat a wide stone house with lit windows and smoke rising from 2 chimneys. Lord Drummore's estate. The sight of it, solid and warm and unhunted, loosened something in Annette's chest that she had not realized she had been holding tight since the night before. A footman met them at the door before they had even stopped fully. Behind him came a man in his late 50s, broad and grey-haired, with the kind of face that had been kind for so long it had simply become the shape of it. He stepped out into the cold without a coat, took one look at Cassius, and gripped his shoulder with both hands. "Good God," said Lord Drummer. What happened to your head?" "A horse," Cassius said, "among other things. Come inside, all of you." His eyes moved to Annette. "You too, miss. Whoever you are, you look like you have been keeping this fool alive, and I owe you a fire and a meal at the very least." Annette almost said she should go home. The word Whitmore was already forming in her mouth, the familiar pull of her small cottage and her cracked herb pots, and Percy the cat who was not hers. But then she thought about the road home. 9 miles in the dark, with Crow's men still unaccounted for, with Gareth Lowe arrested, but his employer still free, with a letter that had not yet arrived where it was going. She went inside. Lord Drummore's housekeeper, a capable woman named Mrs. Yates, took charge with quiet efficiency. She produced food and fresh bandaging and hot water, and showed Annette to a small, warm room where she could wash her hands and face and sit for 5 minutes without someone being in danger. Annette sat on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands and breathed. She had not been frightened while it was happening. Fear had not been useful, so she had set it aside, as she told Cassius. But it was coming for her now, delayed and thorough, moving through her hands as a faint trembling she could not stop for several minutes. She pressed her palms flat on her knees and breathed until it passed. Then she washed her face and went back downstairs. In the main room, Cassius was sitting across from Lord Drummore, and a younger man she had not seen before, sharp-featured and serious, who was introduced as Mr. Alderton, Drummore's solicitor, and, it quickly became apparent, a man who had been quietly helping Cassius gather the documentation in the letter for the past 6 months. He had sharp eyes and an ink stain on his right hand, and he looked at the situation with the focused calm of someone who had been preparing for exactly this eventuality. "The letter is moving," Drummore said, when Annette came in. "Mrs. Drummond's contact confirmed it 2 hours ago. It will reach London by morning." Cassius exhaled once, just once, and then he was still again. But something in his face had changed. The tension that had lived behind his eyes since she first saw them open in her cottage had altered slightly. Not gone, but shifted. The way a storm shifts when it has passed its worst point and is beginning, slowly, to move on. "Crow," he said. "Will be dealt with," Alderton said. "The letter contains enough to implicate him directly. Once it reaches the right desk, his position becomes very difficult to maintain." "He will not simply sit and wait," Faye said. She was standing by the fire with her arms crossed, having apparently made herself at home in Drummore's house, with the ease of someone who had done it before. "No," Drummore agreed. "But he will have very little room to move by morning. And we have enough people watching his house in the city tonight that any movement will be noted immediately." There was more talk after that, careful and specific, about timelines and contacts, and the precise sequence of events that would follow the letter's arrival. Annette listened and said nothing. She was not part of this world. She understood the shape of it, could follow the logic, but the names and connections and layers of power were not hers, and she did not pretend otherwise. At some point, Mrs. Yates put a plate of food in front of her, and she ate it because her body required it, and the fire was warm, and the room was safe, and after 2 days of moving without stopping, she was deeply, completely tired. She did not notice she had fallen asleep in the chair, until she woke to find the room quieter, and the fire lower, and a folded blanket placed over her that had not been there before. She sat up slowly. The room was empty, except for Cassius, who was sitting across from her in the same chair Drummore had occupied, awake and watching her with those grey eyes that she had by now spent entirely too long looking into. "You should sleep," she said, her voice rough with it. "I slept," he said. 2 hours, but it was enough. She did not argue. She pulled the blanket tighter and looked at the fire. Outside, the wind had come up and was moving around the eaves of the house. "When this is finished," he said, "you will go back to Whitmore." It was not a question, but it had something in it that was not quite a statement either. "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "And resume your life there." "It is my life," she said gently. "Yes, I know." He looked at his hands, then at the fire. Then, because he was apparently incapable of leaving things in comfortable silence when they needed to be said, at her. "I do not want you to go." Annette held very still. "That is honest," she said finally. "I have been trying to be honest," he said, "since yesterday. It seems to suit the situation better than most things." She looked at him. Oh, the firelight was on his face, and his bandage was fresh, and his grey eyes were as steady as they had always been. But underneath the steadiness, clearly and unmistakably, was something that had not been there when she first turned him over in the road. Something open. Something that had not been given room to exist in 17 years of obligation and position, and a life that was, by his own admission, hollow. "You live in London," she said. "Sometimes. You are a duke. That is unfortunately permanent, yes. And I am a seamstress in Whitmore who has never been to London and owns a cat that is technically not mine." "I know all of that," he said quietly. "I know it exactly." She looked at the fire for a long time. "Then ask me the thing you are not asking," she said. "Because I am tired, and we have been running for 2 days, and I am not in a condition to navigate around it." He stood, which she had not expected, and crossed the space between them, and crouched down so that they were level, and looked at her directly with the full weight of those eyes. "Come to London," he said. "Not as anything formal, not with any obligation. Just come. Let me show you something beyond Whitmore. Let me give you the choice of a larger life than the one that was handed to you. And then, if you want to go back, I will take you there myself." A pause. "But I want you to have seen it first." Annette looked at him for a very long time. "Percy," she said. Something that was finally, fully, genuinely a smile crossed his face. Real and complete, not a corner of the mouth this time, but the whole thing. And it changed his face so entirely that she had to look away for a moment, and then back. "Mrs. Drummond will take the cat," he said. "She strikes me as a woman who is better company than most people anyway." Annette put her hand over her mouth, which was the only way to contain what was happening to her face. "I will think about it," she said, because she was sensible, and sensible people did not say yes to dukes at midnight, beside dying fires without sleeping on it first. But she was already thinking about it. She had been thinking about it since the field behind her cottage, honestly, since the moment his grey eyes opened and looked at her across her own small room. "That is enough," Cassius said. He sat back down in his chair. He did not say anything more, but he was still looking at her, and she was still looking at the fire, and the silence between them was the warmest thing in the room. The letter arrived in London the following morning. By noon, 2 royal messengers had been dispatched. By evening, Lord Bastian Crow had been summoned to answer questions he could not answer without implicating himself completely. He had apparently chosen to flee, which implication had been predicted and prepared for, and which resulted in his arrest at a coaching inn outside the city before midnight. Alderton brought the news to Drummore's house, with the contained satisfaction of a man who had spent 6 months waiting to say exactly this. Faye received it standing, spine straight, with her eyes briefly closed, and then open again. Drummore poured something into 4 glasses and set them on the table and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. Cassius sat very still for a moment. Then he said, "The child." "Steps are being taken," Alderton said. "The family in the north will be contacted. Properly, carefully, with people who know how to do this without causing damage." He looked at Cassius. "You have done what your father asked of you. The rest will move through the proper channels now." Annette was standing near the window. She was thinking about a child somewhere in the north who did not know their own name, who had been sleeping and eating and growing for 11 years without knowing that the world owed them something more than anonymity. She was thinking about the moment the child would be told, and what it would feel like to discover that someone had been fighting for them for 6 months, even when it nearly cost that someone his life on a country road in the rain. She hoped someone would tell the child that part. She thought it mattered. Faye came to stand beside her. For a moment they simply looked out the window together at the grey winter garden. "You're going to London," Faye said. It was not a question. "I am thinking about it," Annette said. "He has not looked at anyone the way he looks at you," Faye said, "in a very long time, possibly ever." She paused. "I say this not to pressure you, only to make sure you know." "I know," Annette said quietly. Faye nodded once, then she moved away. 2 days later, Annette Collier stood in front of her cottage in Whitmore with a single bag packed, and Percy sitting on the step watching her with the expression of a cat who had fully expected this development. Mrs. Drummond was already there. She had come without being asked, which was the kind of thing Mrs. Drummond did, and she had accepted Percy into her arms with the manner of someone who had been wanting a cat for some time and was simply unwilling to admit it. "You will write," Mrs. Drummond said. "Every week," Annette said. "And if it is not what you hoped?" "Then I will come home," Annette said, "and you will make tea and not say a single word about it." "Obviously," said Mrs. Drummond. Annette looked at her cottage for a long moment, the leaking corner, the herb pots, the chair her mother had sat in, the small and deliberate and mostly peaceful life she had built with her own 2 hands. Then she turned around. Cassius was waiting at the gate. He had a proper horse now, and a coat that did not have mud on it, and his bandage was gone. The cut above his brow had closed, and would leave a faint scar. She could already see it, and she had the particular feeling of knowing she would notice that scar for the rest of her life whenever she looked at his face, and remember the road and the rain and the horse and the moment she chose not to walk past. He opened the gate. She walked through it. He fell into step beside her, and his hand found hers very naturally, without ceremony, like something that had always been waiting to happen. She did not pull away. She let her fingers settle against his, and felt the warmth of it move up through her arm and settle somewhere permanent. "I still have never been to London," she said. "I know," he said, "and I still do not own anything with gold on it." "That," he said, "is temporary." She looked at him sideways. He looked straight ahead, but his mouth had done the thing she had spent 3 days becoming extremely familiar with. The full smile, quiet and real and meant only for her. She looked forward to it too. At the road, at the winter sky beginning to clear, at whatever was waiting beyond the edge of the village and the edge of the life she had always lived carefully inside the boundaries of what she had been given. She thought about a man face down in the rain. She thought about the horse. She thought about the sealed letter and the hidden child, and Mrs. Drummond sending two things at once, because she was the kind of woman who solved problems before you knew you had them. She thought about how extraordinarily strange the world was, how a Thursday errand for Mrs. Hargrove's linen panels had rearranged everything, how one unremarkable girl choosing not to walk past had changed the course of more than one life. She did not think it was fate. She was too sensible for fate, but she thought it was something worth walking toward. They left Whitmore on the East Road, side by side, as the first thin strip of light broke through the winter clouds and fell across the lane in front of them. Not a grand exit. No carriage, no announcement. Just two people, and one road, and everything still unwritten ahead. Which, Annette thought, squeezing the hand that was holding hers, was the best possible way to begin.